Welcome back to my Form 1s to week 3 of Drama Online. My Form 4s are also going to be jumping on this topic because this is something that they need to know, but we are focusing on the Form 1s today. So today we are looking at the types of spaces, the types of venues that performances can happen in. So just before we start, big points that I want to make is that performances uh, deliberately put on for audiences to see. So things like singing in your shower. I guess you could say it's a performance for your shampoo bottles and so on, but that's not necessarily the kind of performance that we're looking at when we are talking in these particular circumstances. So we're really looking at performances that have been rehearsed and specifically put on for an audience, and the types of spaces that these performances happen in. So our goals, we are going to be able to distinguish between a formal and informal theater space. We are going to be able to identify and label the parts of formal theater spaces and also identify the advantages and disadvantages of each formal space. We're not looking too much into informal spaces because that category is quite broad. Great. So let's look at, first of all, the difference between formal and informal theater spaces. So formal theater spaces are spaces that are designed specifically for performances to happen. They are purpose built. So when they were building this space, they said, okay, this is an auditorium. It is built for performances to happen. There's a stage, all of these things. So it's not built to be a classroom. It's not built to be anything else. It's built for performances specifically to happen. And of course, an informal theater space is the exact opposite of that. It's literally any place that was not built specifically for a performance, but that you may have a performance in. So it might be a classroom. If I ask you to put on a play and we perform in the Vapor Building, then the Vapor Building is an informal theater space. The Vapor Building might actually be formal just because there is a stage, but if I ask you to put on a performance on the field, then that would definitely be informal, because when they were building the field, or when they established the field, they never it wasn't done specifically with performances in mind. That is simple, straightforward difference between formal and informal theater spaces. So basically, anywhere can be an informal theater space once you are putting on a performance deliberately for an audience in that place. So we're going straight into the types of stages. So these would be the types of formal theater spaces. First of all, the most popular one is proscenium. And it comes from the Greek word meaning in front of the scene. So the audience are all situated in front of the stage. You'll see it in a picture in the next slide. The main feature actually is the proscenium, or the proscenium arch, which looks like a picture frame that you're watching the action on stage, the play, whatever, through. And of course, we know that the playing area refers to the stage, refers to any area where the actors are moving around. And then, of course, the auditorium is where the audience is seated. So I'm talking about the fourth wall. So sometimes in shows or in theater, but it's easier to look at in shows, you'll see where an actor will break out of just talking to the characters in the action, in the scene, and they will look directly at the camera, or they look directly at the audience and acknowledge the audience and talk to the audience. So when we talk about the fourth wall, we're imagining that a room is closed. It has four walls surrounding it. If it's a stage, then we have to be able to see into the room or see into the world. So therefore, they break down the fourth wall. So there are only 3 walls surrounding, and these 2 at the sides and 1 at the back. And then the fourth wall is this invisible wall that we are looking through to see the action on stage. So the proscenium frame itself then acts as the fourth wall, the final wall, the one at the front. And in a proscenium theater, the seating is raked, which simply means that it is on an incline. And this is so that if the stage is on the same level as the auditorium, then the people in the back won't be able to see. But if it's raked, if you have it on an incline, then the people in the back row will be able to see because they will be higher up. Each row of seats is higher up from the other. So if you think about Napa, Sapa, Naparima Bowl, any of these kinds of spaces, you'll see that the seating is raked, which means it goes on an incline. So these are pictures of a proscenium theater. So as you can see, so the arch, the proscenium arch, is not always an arch. This is a particular instance where it's not an arch, it's just a kind of square. So you see it looks like a picture frame, and this invisible part here would be the fourth wall, and then you have the 2 walls at the side and 1 at the back. So it's like if the stage is a room then, and we are looking into the room from the audience's perspective. And you can see in this one, the arch, it's an actual arch. This curtain in front, this is something that I forgot to put in the slides, but this big curtain here is called the grand curtain. So you'll see when they have a curtain call, usually at the beginning of the show, the curtain will be drawn, so you won't be able to see what's happening behind it until the show starts. So this big one here is called the grand curtain, and actually in a second we're going to go into all the different parts of the formal theater spaces anyway. And yes, as you can see, the seating, each row goes higher than the other, so the seating is raked. So what are the advantages of a proscenium stage? First of all, it is fantastic for set and backdrops. You can, and this is because of this two-dimensional effect, you can put large pieces of set, because proscenium stages are usually very big. You can put large pieces of set, and you can use a backdrop. It is easy to light and set up sound, just because the space is very controlled. So because there are wings at the side, we're going to go into the exact parts in a while, but because there are wings at the side, that's very useful, because in between scenes you can have people off stage and the audience won't be able to see them, or you'll have a lot of things going on backstage. You'll have set moving, and you can do set changes as well, and people won't be able to see until you want them to see. In other types of theaters, then the people kind of have to be on stage at all times. And on that same note, the backstage area is very close to the stage, so that is very useful as well, especially as a performer. If you know you have an entrance to make, it's easy for you to just sit in the wings or stand in the wings and watch what's going on stage and listen and be like, okay, now is my time to come in. And there are many entrances and exits. Usually there are like 3 wings on each side, so that means you have 6 entrances and exits. That's really very useful. The disadvantages are that acting is unnatural, which you may have found yourself as well, because you always have, you cannot walk as a normal person. You always have to be conscious of not turning your back to the audience. Another disadvantage is that the audience might feel far from the action, and that is because the stage is kind of set in, and the audience, it's very separate. The stage and the audience are very separate from each other, so it's not very intimate at all. And you really have to exaggerate acting, you have to exaggerate makeup, you have to exaggerate costume set, all of these things, because the audience is so far from the action. You have to make everything larger than life so that they can actually see it without being on stage per se. So this is a picture of the auditorium in Sapa, which is the Southern Academy for the Performing Arts, and this is a proscenium auditorium. So as I said, this area here, the stage, is also called the playing area, just as actors are also called players and acting is also called playing. And on the side, you can't see it very well in this image, but on the side you have the wings, which is where things will go when they're not needed on stage. This here is not an arch here, but it's just a square in Sapper, but this is the proscenium arch, and of course the auditorium, otherwise known as the house. Also, some theaters, so Sapper doesn't have this, but Naparima Bowl does. This is a picture of Naparima Bowl. It has an orchestra pit. So this is for performances where you have a live orchestra. They are situated in the pit. And also, I mean, it's very small on Naparima Bowl stage, but this little piece here that extends right beyond the proscenium arch is called the apron. So it just juts a little bit out. Some stages have bigger aprons than others. Naparima Bowl has a very small apron, but it juts out beyond the proscenium frame. So the orchestra pit looks very small in this picture, but in reality, this is how it is when you have a performance. So you see you have the conductor here, you have somebody playing clarinet, keyboard, piano. There's a lot of instruments that can fit down in the orchestra pit, and they will be accompanying the actors as they are live on stage. So that way the orchestra can actually see what's happening on stage, because of course they're playing music to the action on stage, right? So it's very convenient for them to be able to see and follow as the show is going along, so they know when to come in and all that jazz. Especially if you have singers who are going in time with the orchestra, it's sometimes they can even conduct the singers from off stage as well. This is Naparima Bowl, if I didn't mention that. Right, so in looking at the parts of the theater, we're going to look mainly at the proscenium. So this diagram is showing you the different types of curtains. The big curtain on top, as we would have seen in Sapper, is called the teaser, and the ones on the sides are called tormentors. So the teaser is an easy way to remember it. The tormentors are huge, they're really long, they're big, but the teasers are just kind of short curtains, and right behind that, not in all theaters, but in most proscenium theaters, there's the border. There's the stage floor, and behind that, quite against the wall, I don't think Sapper has this, but the leg, which would be a wooden part, while the tormentors and the teasers can actually move, and then the grand curtain will come in front there. Now this, in the back here, the cyc, is short for cyclorama, which is also known as the sky cloth. We'll look at that in a little while, but what it is basically, it's a huge white piece of cloth that forms the backdrop, the default backdrop for a stage, and it's very versatile. You can do many things with it. So for instance, so as I said, that's the word cyclorama. Short term is cyc or sky cloth, but cyc or cyclorama is usually most common. So in this scene, they put light against the cyclorama to make it look orangey, so kind of like evening time. And then you see there are clouds and things hung from the ceiling. While in another scene, you see the different lighting gives it a totally different experience. It makes the scene look completely different. So this piece of so really it's just a big piece of white cloth, and any light that you reflect on it can give different effects depending on what you want. So this is how it will generally look. Again, this is Naparima Bowl. So the cyc is usually lit in blue, if it's lit at all. Right, so moving on. So that was the four parts of the formal theater. So we're moving on to a different type of stage, which is the thrust stage. So it's also called 3/4 round. And this is because the audience surround the stage on 3 sides, as opposed to with proscenium, where the audience is all seated on 1 side of the stage. And thrust is the exact opposite to proscenium. So instead of the stage being pushed back from where the audience is, it actually juts out. It thrusts out into the audience. So that's the easy way to remember it, thrust. So to thrust means to throw something out, to extend something to somebody or something. And so that's why they call it thrust. That's a very easy way to remember what kind of stage it is. And of course, I'll show you a picture in a second. Yeah, not really important. The kind of stage that Shakespeare preferred. And a good example is Central Bank Auditorium in Port of Spain. So exactly as I said, as you can see, the stage is set out into the audience, and the audience are on 1, 2, and 3 sides. So usually with a proscenium stage, the stage would be back. It would be set back. But in the thrust stage, it is literally jutting out into where the audience is seated. So the advantages are that it is much more intimate, because of course the audience is closer to the action. It allows for a very large audience. That's because if you rake the seating, you can have a lot of seats going back. And it still has the use of backstage. So let me just head back to the picture. As you can see, you have the stage, but you also have these entrances here, which will give you a backstage. So that is a very useful part of the thrust, as opposed to other types of stages where you have no backstage whatsoever. Disadvantages: there are no curtains. So all of these set changes or any changes whatsoever must be done within the audience's view. While usually you would want to do set changes maybe behind the curtain, behind the grand curtain, so that the audience doesn't see. But basically with thrust, the audience has to see everything. There are few entrances and exits, as opposed to proscenium, which would have probably 6 wings altogether. The thrust stage would probably only have 2 entrances and exits. And because it is so close to the audience, everything has to be much more visible and more realistic. So usually with proscenium, because it's so far away, you could have things that aren't necessarily painted neatly, but because the audience is far, they would not notice it. But with thrust, because the audience is literally right up under the stage, everything has to look super clean and crisp and clear. So this is another example. And as you can see, the seating is raked. As I said, it goes up on an incline, and behind that curtain you will have the backstage. Our next type of stage is the arena, which we should be familiar with. So this is also called theater in the round. Thrust is usually called 3/4 round. Arena is usually called theater in the round because the audience literally surrounds the stage on all sides. And the entrances and exits, because you don't have a backstage, the only entrances and exits are through gaps in the seating called vomitoriums. So this comes from the Italian/Greek tradition of when they had in the Colosseum, when they would have like bullfights and stuff. These little gaps in the seating would supposedly be where the participants would go to vomit, but that's not actually true. That's just where people think it came from. So this is another arena stage, and those little things there between the seats, those are where the actors would enter and exit. Those are the vomitoriums. And just because it's arena doesn't mean it, or called theater in the round, doesn't mean it has to be round. This one is square, but it's still that the audience surrounds it on all sides, surrounds the playing area on all sides. So we're just going to watch a video very quickly of a play that was done in the round, and looking at how the audience, the actors, and the director would have had to deal with being able to engage the audience on all sides. So what I had to do here is that I had to take this clip out of the YouTube video itself because YouTube wouldn't let me upload it because of copyright things. So I instead I put it on Google Drive. So what I want you to do is just pause this video now, go over to Google Drive, watch that video, and then come back here. Sorry about that. It's copyright things. I'm doing something illegal. I can't explain it. But yeah, so just pause the YouTube video, go and watch this clip, and then come back and I'll talk about it right afterwards. Thank you. Right, so what you would have noticed there is that the blocking was very smart in that it's set in a barber shop, and because the barber chair goes around, it would have been blocked so that the actor spins the chair around and speaks to all different sides of the room. So he would perform it as he would do in a literal room with four walls. And this is so that because in real life we don't think about performing, or we don't think about talking to people on one side of a room. We will stand up and use the full 360-degree area that we are working in. So in this particular one, they use the chair as a means for him to be able to talk to people on all sides of the room, so that you wouldn't have one side of the audience who are only seeing his back, for instance. So the advantages would be that you can have a lot of people seated very close to the stage. The actors can develop a strong relationship to the audience because they're closer, and you would have seen that in the clip as well. He was really able to engage with the audience because he was so close to them, and because he was using this natural 360-degree body positioning. And they have several entrances and exits through what we would call the vomitoriums. Disadvantages would be that set and scenery would be very limited because they would block the audience's view. So you can't construct a house in an arena theater because literally it would be blocking some side of the audience. And when we talk about blocking, I should really say obstructing, because blocking is the word for the movements that you do on stage so that they are rehearsed. So you're blocking, it would be that you walk down stage when you say this line, or you sit on the chair and you spin around, things like that, or you're blocking. While if I'm talking about not being able to see something, I really need to say obstructing. I should have said that before. But in an arena, the blocking is very difficult, and there will be sideline issues. There will always be somebody who's getting in your back. Because humans, we only have one front of us. If you stand up in one way, once half of the auditorium will always be seeing your back. So creating blocking is quite difficult in the arena. And also the backstage area would not be close to the stage like it is in the proscenium, because you don't have wings. So when you go through the vomitoriums, the backstage area would probably be in another room in some other part of the building, but it won't be close to where you are, which is quite inconvenient factors. Going on to our next type of stage, which is the traverse stage. So the traverse is very similar to a catwalk. The only difference is that a catwalk would have it will be shaped like a T, but the traverse is shaped like an I, a common I without the dot, or a common L. Yeah. So a catwalk would have a piece at the back. A traverse is literally just a rectangular strip of stage. It's not very common at all. I don't think we have any traverse stages in Trinidad and Tobago, but we have places that we can transform into traverse stages. And the audience just sits on either side, and the audience faces each other. That's as simple as it is. So this is an example of a traverse stage. So we have the playing area going straight down the middle, and then we have the audience seated on either side. We don't have the audience at the back or the front. We just have two segments of the audience, and they face inwards. So the advantages would be that the seats are very close to the stage, so it's a very intimate space, quite similar to theatre in the round. It's easy for someone to travel because of the way that the stage is set up. No matter where you stand on that playing area, you will be able to be heard by the audience, which is great. So we always want to be able to see and hear properly. The audience gets a full view of the playing area no matter where it's seated because it is rectangular. Disadvantages would be that it is quite hard to create blocking because it's rectangular in shape. So it would be long on one end and short on the other end. That's pretty difficult if you want to put on a performance. Again, just like the arena, there's no backstage area. You have limited entrances and exits. You'll basically have either 2 or 4 entrances and exits. And then, just like arena, you cannot use backdrop or sets because you will obstruct some part of the audience. So let's just go back to the diagram with what I was talking about with the limited entrances and exits. If you see, literally the only place the actors would be able to enter here would be there or there. That's it. As opposed to Proscenium, where you'll have about 6 places to enter and exit. Right, our next type of stage is black box. Quite simply, it's otherwise known as flexible theater. Why? Because it's very flexible. A black box is literally just a big room. It doesn't have to be black. A lot of times it is black because that's a really good color to use for performances. You can do a lot with black. But it can be any color really and truly. But there's no fixed seating or staging whatsoever. It is literally just a plain big room that you can do whatever you want with it, which can be great. So you can literally alter it to suit the needs of any performance. And one example is a big black box that is the name of the venue, Big Black Box. In Port of Spain, and another one is Trinidad Theatre Workshop, which is also in Port of Spain. So I just want to give some examples so this one is white, but it's a black box. Just examples of how you can transform the same space into many different things in a black box theater. So this is one. These are 2 pictures from the same performance. So you see they used this is actually Trinidad Theatre Workshop in Port of Spain. So they use lighting and projections and things to make 2 different things with the same space. And again, so you see almost 3 completely different looks for the same space. And that's why they call it a flexible space. You can do whatever you want with it. So this is another example. I just want to show you again how flexible a black box space could be. So this is a black box from where I went to university. So this is just a picture of it, more or less bare. Actually, it was set up for a performance here. And I'm just going to show you some videos of how differently you can adapt the same space to suit different performances. As we can see, it's the same space, but depending on what you do with it, depending on where you set the lights, the projector, the furniture, all of that, it can turn into completely different places. You can put the audience wherever you want. You can put the stage wherever you want. You can put the stage in the audience, and the audience in the stage. Is very flexible. It's literally just a big empty room. Right, so with black box, the advantages would be, of course, that you can basically any type of performance there because it is so flexible. You can create whatever kind of stage you want. So a black box can become a theater, and around it can become a traverse stage, it can become a catwalk, it can become anything really and truly. It's very good for small productions and small audiences because it's usually just a relatively small room, and it creates very intimate space because everybody is so close to the playing area and sometimes in the playing area itself. And it's easy for sound because it's a small room, so the sound doesn't have very far to travel. The main disadvantage is I can't really put big, elaborate performances in a black box. So you might not be able to put The Lion King in a black box, or Wicked, or any of these big musicals. But if you have like student productions, experimental things, small scale things, the black box is perfect for that. So our next type is the open air theater. As the name suggests, this is a formal theater space, but it is just situated outdoors. So just like black box, an open air theater might take on different designs. So it might be an open air arena, an open air proscenium, an open air thrust. But of course, because this is built with the design already established, it's different. While a black box, you can create these types of stages out of it, and open air theater will come as one of the below. So it has no ceiling or walls. It might have a back wall depending on if it's like proscenium or something, or thrust, but it has no ceiling because it's open air. And an example is the Naprima Bowl amphitheater. So Naprima Bowl has the theater inside, and behind that is also the amphitheater, which they don't really use that often, and we'll talk about why when we talk about the disadvantages. Also Palmy's Park for Ram Leela, where they construct a stage because it's outdoors. It is open air theater, outdoors but constructed for a performance. So this is the amphitheater in the back of Naprima Bowl. I cannot tell you when last they had a performance here, but it does exist. So you see the seating is raked, it goes up like that, and it more or less follows a proscenium style, kind of, mostly. And so it would be basically a proscenium open air theater. So the advantages would be that it's quite interesting to sit and watch a performance while you're outdoors. The disadvantages would be that because it's so open, the sound will travel very far. You can't really control the sound as much as if it were in a room, so it can be quite difficult. Bad weather, if the sun is too, you basically cannot have an open air performance in Trinidad during the day because your audience will melt. If it's raining, then the audience will not enjoy the performance. If it's too windy, then you could blow away set and props and things like that. So it is very susceptible to the weather. And our final type now is street theater. So street theater, as the name suggests, is theater that happens on the street. So it is also called promenade theater. So promenade in two senses of the word, because a promenade is like a promenade. So like promenade in San Fernando, Port of Spain, it is outdoors, it is close to the streets, but also because promenade comes from the French word mean to walk. So theater that moves is also called promenade theater for this reason. So it can actually be formal or informal depending on the type of performance. So sometimes they actually will put up seats or rafters or whatever for street theater, and that would make it formal. But if it's something that's just happening in the middle of a savannah, just like that, with no kind of, not a savannah, in the middle of a promenade, just like that, without any kind of technical consideration, then that would make it informal. So informal, again, just recapping, is when the space is not designed to hold a performance, but formal is where you do design the space to hold a performance. So street theater is really common in Trinidad actually, especially for carnival performances, canboulay reenactment, traditional carnival portrayals, which would be at Adam Smith Square, flash mobs. If you don't know what a flash mob is, I would suggest you YouTube it. It's basically when people start dancing in public. That's about it. So in the case of flash mobs, it would be informal, because if you were to design a space for a performance, then people would know it was coming, and that would completely defeat the purpose of flash mob. Good Friday stations at the Cross and San Fernando Hill and other places around the country where they have it outside are also street theater. So we're just going to watch a few videos. The first one is from Canboulay reenactment. These are videos that I took this year. So this was a formal theater space, even though it happened in the streets in Piccadilly Greens. It was formal because the space was specifically designed for this occasion at that point in time.